Hello and welcome to another faction tier ranking video for Star Wars Legion, and today we are finally getting around to the Rebels. I apologize in advance for this video taking so long, but I do have very little experience with the Rebel faction, and I had to do a lot more research here and headcanon things more so than I would with other factions, which means this video may not be the most spot-on assessment of the Rebel units. And if you guys think I got any of these units wrong, please let me know in the comment section down below. Not that you guys were shy on doing that in the previous videos, but I definitely want to hear more from you guys on this video in particular, especially if you are a Rebel player yourself, or have a lot of experience facing off against them. That being said, these videos are of course going to be living document types of videos that will be updated as new units are introduced to the game, or as new synergies and points adjustments bring things back into relevancy in the future. Also, at this point, with 4 of these videos underneath my belt, I have to say there is a little bit of inherent bias from video to video, as I am stacking all of these units up within the context of their faction, which means that while a unit may be S tier for someone like the Rebels, if I were to throw it in the Republic tier list, there's a good chance it would drop down a tier or two. Partly because of faction synergy, but also because, let's face it, the initial units released for this game have not aged too well, as the original meta was very rudimentary, and a lot of newer keywords and strategies now run circles around them. And I know that might kind of sound like I'm just trying to very politely say that the Rebel faction sucks, but that's not exactly the case here, as many of you guys pointed out in my Separatist Alliance video when I ranked the B1 droids rather low. Quantity has a quality of its own, and 6 units that would be C tier on their own can very well overwhelm and overtake an S tier unit who may come in at the same amount of points, or potentially even more. So again, there are biases that I try and take into account when making these videos, but it's not always simple. But with no further ado, let's go ahead and start taking a look at the Rebel Alliance and see how their units stack up. Of course, we are going in order of release dates, which is going to start us right off at the core box, the original one that launched the game itself, in which the Rebel forces were led by Luke Skywalker in his Commander unit configuration. And I will be ranking Commander Luke at a B, albeit a very high B. He was definitely S tier at the initial launch of the game, and is honestly still a pretty good hero. However, with the Operative Luke expansion release, it's very hard to justify taking Commander Luke over Operative Luke, especially with his rather lackluster and vanilla set of keywords. Now, he does have a pretty good built-in ranged attack, which is pretty rare for Force users, but without keywords like Sharpshooter, it's probably not going to be making the best use of that Pierce keyword, given that it is a rather low dice attack. On top of that, this iteration of Luke is going to have a gear upgrade slot rather than a training upgrade, which is a pretty bad trade-off on hero characters, especially melee ones, as it's going to lose you a lot of access to things like aim tokens, and that beloved extra red die from Tenacity. But following Luke Skywalker, we were introduced to the Rebel Trooper Squad, who exist as the yin to the Stormtroopers' yang, and have strong offensive dice with weak defensive dice, and we'll be making better uses of dodge tokens with that Nimble 1 keyword. However, I am going to have the Rebel Troopers coming in at a rank of C, and that is for one main reason, one that is directly tied to that contrast with Stormtroopers, as they do not serve as a good foundation for a unit to be upgraded. If you go watch my Empire tier ranking video, I will elaborate on how these Stormtroopers are rather lackluster in their vanilla profile, but with good defense dice and an innate surge to hits, they prove to be a very optimal squad to beef up, one that can become quite powerful when given the proper tools and support. However, with the Rebel Troopers, you have the opposite here. Yes, you have a defensive surge, but there is no way to increase the quality of your defensive dice, unlike your offensive dice that can be remedied through heavy weapon upgrades. Now, the Rebel Troopers do get access to the Z6 heavy weapon upgrade, but that is going to be a 50% increase in the unit's points, one that is going to make them a high priority target for your opponents, which they shouldn't have too much trouble melting through with those white armor saves. Still, there is definitely something to be said about the Rebel Troopers being very affordable, and you can get a fully kitted out Z6 squad for just 71 points. And all of that almost does nudge them up to the B tier. But with just 4 models in your base squad, which is on par with the Republic and the Empire, you're really going to be punished by focus fire and need to rely on either heavy cover or getting dodge tokens. But that will move us along to the third model that came in that initial core set, which is going to be the Rebel Atrt. And this iteration of the Atrt is slightly different from the Republic counterpart, and lends itself a little bit better to offensive range capabilities thanks to an innate surge to crits. And that is going to get the Atrt up into that B tier. It is a pretty affordable support vehicle, and with that rotary blaster, you're going to be able to get a good little platform that can really fish for crits, all at just 75 points. That being said, a weapon upgrade is mandatory on this thing, as its base attacks are pretty meh outside of melee, and it is slightly more fragile than the Republic iteration of the vehicle, as it doesn't have a defensive surge and is going to be relying solely on that armor keyword to block incoming fire, which at the end of the day makes the Atrt a rather middle-of-the-road vehicle, and while it does sit at the B tier, support units, with the exception of a few ice lizards, seem to be becoming one of the least useful unit slots in the game. So while the Atrt is a B, it is a very, very low B teetering on C. But after the Atrt, we are going to have our first Rebel heavy vehicle, and that is going to be the T-47 Air Speeder. And while this vehicle has been a dud for most of its lifespan, a continuous stream of tweaks to this unit, including point drops and new pilot upgrades, has brought the Air Speeder back into relevancy and is going to land it a B ranking on my list. First of all, this unit dropped 35 points, along with a major cost reduction to its weapon upgrades, and when you combine its pretty impressive dice pool with that surge to crits, this unit packs a pretty respectable amount of firepower at just 130 points. On top of that, it is incredibly mobile with a speed 3 movement, and is pretty durable with a defensive surge and armor keyword, and can even get keywords like Sharpshooter 1 or the Field Commander keyword with the new Aa5 pilot upgrades. So overall, the T-47 is now a pretty sweet package, one that almost gets it up to A tier, and I have heard very good things recently from Rebel players about this vehicle. So again, please let me know in the comments below, guys, do you think this vehicle is actually pretty awesome now? And where would you put it on the list if you played with or against it? But after the Airspeeder, we are of course going to have Leia Organa, who exists as the sort of antithesis to General Veers, and focuses on dishing out dodge tokens rather than aim tokens, and is going to land herself in the B ranking. And right off the bat, I gotta say, it kind of sucks how long it took portable scanners to come out, as General Veers has been boosting up his support abilities for a while with electro binoculars. I think it took Leia almost a year to get her symbiotic upgrade. But Leia is a bona fide support commander, much like Veers. She is going to have 2 command upgrade slots, which is pretty useful, along with Take Cover 2, Inspire 2, and Sharpshooter 2. And that Sharpshooter keyword, along with Surge to Crit, 3 black dice, and Pierce 1, is going to make her ranged attack pretty useful, but it will be handicapped by being range 2. And if you're spending most of the round dishing out Take Cover, there's a decent chance you may not have closed enough range for Leia to start shooting every turn. Unfortunately, Princess Leia is only going to be Courage 2, which is honestly just ridiculous. We all know that Leia should be Courage 3. She's arguably the bravest character in A New Hope, and while I get this was probably done for balance reasons, I just wish it weren't. And I don't think a single player would complain about Leia being busted if they came out tomorrow and said her courage value is now 3. But Hollywood Wargaming, you ask, if she's the antithesis to Veers, why is she a rank lower than him? Well, that's going to tie right back in with that core mechanic that the game launched with Empire needing aim tokens and Rebels needing dodges. And the fundamental difference between the two is that aim tokens are used when you want. Dodge tokens are used in a more reactionary way, meaning you have far less control as to when they become valuable. So, while I do still find Leia as a very good support commander, I do find her to be less useful than her Imperial counterpart. But after Princess Leia, we are going to continue our downward spiral with the Fleet Troopers. Now, these guys are unfortunately going to be a D tier ranking. I know the community has tried so hard to make these guys work, and with the Aa5 there was hope on the horizon. But let's be honest, there's probably so much better units to put inside a transport like that, especially now with the new Kashyyyk Resistance expansion, who is going to be another high quantity white dice units that also has access to Pierce. So yeah, Fleet Troopers, they have a surge to hit, which is nice, something I said was lacking in the regular Rebel Troopers, and they do get that awesome scattergun upgrade, but they are very short range at range 1 to 2, they're not durable, they have a lackluster keyword, and they come from an era of Star Wars Legion where they were afraid to put more than 4 models in a base unit. So at the end of the day, Fleet Troopers just don't really work overall, and I think they should skim off a few points to make them a little more viable. But after that, we are going to have the Redneck launch satellite, also known as the 1.4 FD laser cannon team. And this is going to be a C tier unit. It's got 5 black dice at range 5 with surge to hit, which is a pretty impressive amount of firepower. And hey, it's even got the same defensive stats as Princess Leia. But it is an emplacement trooper, and that means this guy is not going to be moving anywhere, which is an absolute nail in the coffin when it comes to a unit being competitive in Star Wars Legion. But let's say you get a fantastic deployment with this unit, and he has plenty of ripe targets to choose from while holding down a strong objective area. In that scenario, which would be the most optimal for this unit, you will still melt under focused fire as your 6 wounds are only backed up by a white die with a defensive surge. So overall, this is a rather poor unit that would get into that D range if it wasn't 5 black dice at range 5. But next up here, we are going to have everybody's favorite smuggler, who is, of course, Han Solo. But unfortunately, Han isn't really anyone's favorite commander, and he is going to come in at that low C tier ranking. With Pierce 2, Surge to Crit, and Sharpshooter 1, his dice are incredibly lethal, however, they are also very low quantity, and while Gunslinger shores that up a little bit, it doesn't really make up for the fact that he is basically Commander Luke without the lightsaber or force powers. And while Solo does have different keywords here that are going to boost his survivability, he isn't going to last very long with that 5+ armor save when he comes face to face with the bulk of your opponent's army. And when you consider the fact that he needs to be doing that in order to make the best use of his Gunslinger keyword, the shortcomings are going to be pretty obvious. But Han's real shortcomings, in my opinion, are his command cards, as he was released during a time of Star Wars Legion where they weren't getting really crazy with the command cards, and they really didn't capitalize on Han's wily nature, and his 0-pip Han Shot First card just really isn't that impressive. In fact, I'd say it's even laughably bad when you compare it to someone like General Grievous or Count Dooku. However, I would definitely put my chips in on them at some point releasing an operative Han Solo, one that would give us a better sculpt, and some more invigorating command cards along with a overall better unit profile. But after Han Solo, we are going to have our first Special Forces expansion for the Rebel Alliance, and that of course is going to be the Rebel Commandos. And here we are going to be referring to the full-size Commando Squad, not the Strike Team, and they will be getting a ranking tier of B. Rebel Commandos are a very inexpensive Special Forces option here, one that is pretty similar to the standard Rebel Trooper units, but has surge to hit along with a few other keywords to boost their offensive and defensive capabilities, most of which are cover-oriented with Sharpshooter and low profile. And you throw a training upgrade slot in there too, and you actually have a pretty solid, well-rounded version of the Rebel Trooper Squad, who are still very affordable in the grand scheme of things. That being said, they are still fragile, and they don't really have a good heavy weapons upgrade here, as the sniper should be included in strike teams, rather than a full-size squad who wants to get within range 3 of an opponent and start exchanging blows. Now, you could expand this unit by equipping a Saboteur heavy weapon upgrade here, but for the most part, Saboteurs aren't the most competitive in the game. In fact, I don't really see anybody ever run Saboteurs. And personally, I believe they are way too expensive for what they do. So that is going to keep this rather fragile unit at 4 models most of the time, which is a major drawback. But that is going to move us along to the Rebel Commando Strike Team, who are of course the sniper teams who dominated the meta for the early stages of the game. And while they faded in relevancy over the years, they are still a very potent unit who is going to be earning the A ranking here. Although I will say they are going to be a rather low A ranking, as the Rebel Commando Sniper does have the worst dice pool of all sniper heavy weapon upgrades across the board, sporting just 1 black and 1 white die. That means this unit is definitely going to want to have an aim token every time it shoots, but snipers aren't really doing a whole lot of moving anyways, so you usually are free to take that action. And having a built-in Pierce keyword rather than something like Lethal that requires you to spend tokens is definitely an advantage in its own right, so I do think that they still earn that A tier ranking. But once again, the Empire variant here is going to come out on top. But that is going to move us along to our first operative expansion release for the Rebels, and that of course is going to be Chewbacca. And if you've been following my channel for a while, you probably know that I'm not a very big fan of him. In fact, you could call me a hater, as I am going to be ranking Chewbacca in the D tier, although I will say up front that he was getting close to the C tier line, but I'm not a very big fan of operatives to begin with, and Chewbacca overall just doesn't do it for me. He did receive a 20-point reduction in cost, And he does have a somewhat respectable dice pool with 2 red, 2 white, backed up by surge to crits and pierce. But with white defense dice and no defensive surge, he is just going to completely melt under focused fire, and you will see those 9 wounds vanish pretty quickly. And that's going to make his Guardian 3 keyword rather unappealing, as even the humble Rebel Trooper is going to have a better armor save than him, all while still having the same amount of wounds point for point. Chewbacca also has very situational command cards that do require you to take other heroes in your list, and if you're not running those heroes, you're not really going to be able to use Chewbacca's command cards, at least not properly. So overall, I do think Rebel Chewbacca is a pretty big dud, and I expect Kessel levels of salt once the unit card for Republic Chewbacca is revealed, as I would put money on it being better than this. But after Chewbacca, we are going to have the original Wookiee Warriors expansion, and if you're watching this video in the future, these are going to be the standard melee-oriented Wookiee Warriors, not the Kashyyyk Resistance, and they are going to be coming in at a high B tier for me, as they are a high wound unit that sports a pretty respectable damage output at close range, be it melee or range 1 to 2 with those blasters, and they do have various ways to get Pierce added to the units, most notably if you're running them as a bona fide melee unit with the Duelist keyword. And they even have access to the Armor 1 keyword with that new Wookiee Warrior shield upgrade, which is a retrofit that's going to better benefit the melee playstyle on these Wookiee Warriors, while the old Bowcaster upgrade will become more favorable on the Kashyyyk Resistance, which we will take a look at later in this video. But overall, Wookiee Warriors are a pretty strong unit whose only major drawback is their bad armor saves, but that can be mitigated by getting into melee or running that Wookiee shield. But after the Wookiee Warriors, we are going to have the Rebel Officer, and unfortunately for the Rebels, this guy is probably the worst generic officer throughout all 4 of the factions, and will earn himself a D tier ranking. Much like the Imperial Officer and General Veers, the Rebel Officer is more or less a diet version of Leia, and if Leia isn't quite as good as Veers, then this guy's not going to be quite as good as the Imperial Officer for the same reasons. But on top of all that, the Rebel faction isn't really one that is strapped for points, and they don't really need to be taking cheap commanders in their lists to cram in more activations. And doubling down on that, most of the commanders they do have access to are already rather inexpensive. But after the Rebel Officer, we are going to have Jyn Erso, the hero of Rogue One. And while Jyn can be a massive thorn in the side, she is definitely no Iden Versio, and will come in at the C tier, albeit a relatively high C tier. She's just an all-around mediocre commander, and her only real standout trait here is the fact that she is a commander who can infiltrate, but none of her attacks are very deadly, and her command cards are all very situational, and tend to fall into that same pit trap of the dodge token conundrum I mentioned earlier, in which they react to your opponent's maneuvers, giving you less overall control as to when you actually want to play these command cards. Fortunately, Jyn has received a 30-point decrease in cost over the time since her release, but I still find her to be an overall lackluster commander, one that's not very good at the support role or the offensive role, which is why she is at the C tier. But after Jyn Erso, we are going to have the Rebel Pathfinders, who came in that Rogue One release, and these guys are a Special Forces unit who are going to be coming in at the B tier for me. And these guys are going to be a very mobile unit who are going to be good at board control, not just because they have Infiltrate, but also because of that Dauntless keyword that is going to allow them to make extra move actions. But what makes the Pathfinders very interesting to me is the fact that they have an armament upgrade that is going to give them a variety of different weapon configurations that's essentially going to get more powerful the closer you get to your opponent. And said armament upgrade is now free to equip, which really makes these guys a very versatile ranged skirmishing unit. But on the downside, these guys are relatively expensive for the Rebel Alliance, and they are still somewhat fragile with that 5+ armor save, though the Danger Sense keyword is going to help you out a bit there. But moving along, we are going to have our second heavy unit released for the Rebel Alliance, and that is going to be the X-34 Land Speeder. And this is another vehicle that spent most of its lifetime rather unusable, but through a stream of continuous updates and tweaks, along with some retrofitting upgrade cards from that Aa5 expansion, the X-34, much like the Airspeeder before it, has come back into relevance, and is going to be earning that B tier ranking, though I could see it entering A tier at some point in the future. It is a very mobile unit that can transport single models, and is also the Toyota Helix of the backworld planets, as this thing can be upgraded in various ways to be a pretty potent gun platform. However, this isn't the most durable vehicle, and the more you kit it out, the more likely it is going to draw enemy fire, and potentially make it a poor investment, much unlike the Toyota Helix. Still, we have a slew of new pilot and crew upgrades for Rebel vehicles, and characters like the Hotshot Pilot, the Gonk Droid, or the Unstable Astromech have potential to make for a very unique playstyle with this model, and will definitely help pick up the slack, be it in defensive or offensive capabilities. But after this land speeder expansion, the Rebels seem to finally get their ace in the hole, with a character you might know as Sabine Wren. And it should be no surprise to you guys that Sabine is going to be an S-tier character for me. She is a highly mobile and durable unit, who excels at both ranged and melee combat as long as she is equipped with that Darksaber, and with her surges and various keywords, her unit card is impressive in its own right even before upgrades, which, while we're on the topic of, Sabine does get unique gear upgrades, and while they may be a bit gimmicky and don't quite stack up with her Darksaber upgrade, they are still welcome additions. And on top of all that, Sabine Wren has some pretty fantastic command cards. And while her 1-pip may not turn her into a super soldier, much like other heroes' 1-pip cards, her 2 and 3-pip cards are very good support cards that really put a lot of other prominent Rebel heroes to shame. However, there is one slight chip in Sabine's armor, and that is the fact that she does not have a charge keyword, which is going to reel her in a bit as a melee character, but you still do have speed 3 and also the Dauntless keyword if you take the Darksaber, which is going to mitigate that drawback a little bit. Still, Sabine overall is not inexpensive, which is a major drawback when you consider that she is an operative and will still need a commander alongside her. But that's not the end of the world for the Rebels, as you do have a lot of inexpensive commanders, and you're really not strapped for points throughout the army. But with our first S-tier unit wrapped up, we are going to be moving along to our third core option for the Rebels, and that is going to be the Rebel Veterans. And these guys are going to be a B-tier ranking for me. At 2 more points per model, they are going to be gaining a training slot and an offensive surge, which helps remedy one of my bigger problems with the Rebel Troopers, who serve as a rather poor base unit for upgrades. So while the Veterans are still lacking in durability, they are going to have a few more avenues when it comes to upgrading their offensive capabilities, notably by acquiring aim tokens with training upgrades, and by making use of a heavy weapon upgrade that makes great synergy with the surge to hit, by throwing 4 white dice at range 4 with critical 2. So if you're trying to place a little bit more faith in your core trooper options, Rebel Veterans may be the way to go. Still, just remember that they are somewhat flimsy, which is going to hurt you a little bit more when you start losing models, considering that these are relatively expensive for Rebel units. But it's worth mentioning that the Rebel Veterans do have Coordinate Emplacement Trooper, and that is because, much like the Shore Troopers, this box set is going to contain another unit inside it that operates as a detachment to your Rebel Trooper squad, and that is going to be the Medium Mark II Blaster. And this is going to be a C-tier unit for me, although I will say it was pretty hard for me to rank this, especially without any battlefield experience against or with it. But when you compare it to the Shore Trooper Mortar, this thing is lacking the range, which is going to make it harder to trigger that fire support considering that it does have the cumbersome keyword. Still, it is an affordable way to flesh out your core troops here, and 4 black dice with critical 2 is nothing to scoff at. But let me know in the comments section below, have you used this weapon? Do you think it's on par with the Rebel Veterans and should be up there in B tier or maybe even higher? Or do you agree with my assessment when I say that it's going to be struggling to do fire support and keep up with your other units? But continuing with the Hoth theme, we are now going to have the legendary Taunton Riders, who will be an S-tier unit for me. I know they have received a slew of nerfs that have kept them from being the most competitive unit in the game, but seriously, you look at this unit card and they just went crazy with the keywords here. Agile 1, Relentless, and Sharpshooter 1 are keywords that would make most heroes in the game jealous. But with 8 wounds, offensive and defensive surges, and 4 red dice ranged, this unit card is on par, if not outright better, with other heroes, all for under 100 points. I really don't know what FFG was thinking when they wrote this unit. It really has no right being this stacked with keywords and abilities. Why give them Sharpshooter and 4 red dice? Like, why? That's so powerful. And the funny thing is, that's not even how you're going to be attacking most of the time because of how good the RAM keyword was. So if you want a bunch of hero tier units running around the battlefield, go ahead and fill those support slots with Tauntons, and see how many friends you make at your local tournament. But after the Tauntons, we are going to have a bit of an oddball unit, and that of course is going to be R2d2 and C3po, who came in the Crashed Escape Pod expansion. And they are a bit of a tough unit to rank, as their presence on the battlefield is very mild. But they will earn the B tier ranking from me right in the middle of the road, albeit rather low for the Rebels, as they are a unit that really need to be in a highly specialized list for you to slot them into. Sure, you could always throw R2D2 on his own into a list to try and score that secret mission point, but I don't think that's the best use of 45 points, and I really would go for a 2-fold perk with R2 if you do plan on incorporating him in your list, be it by making use of that repair keyword or including C3PO to hand out tokens to other units. But again, with all the units that are very hard for me to gauge on this scale, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Is throwing R2 into a land speeder and then driving him in to get that objective point well worth it? Or are you like me and struggle to justify paying $40 to have both of these models? But after R2, we are going to go back to back with the operatives and take a look at Operative Luke. And what is there to say about Operative Luke other than to say he is probably the best unit in the Rebel faction and 100% earns the S tier ranking. Now, Operative Luke has an awesome dice pool of 7 black dice backed up by Surge to crits, and should you throw Tenacity on his training, he will likely be having 8 dice, one of which will be red. And with 7 wounds and red defense die, he is very, very durable, more so than any Wookiees on the battlefield. And comes with 3 Force upgrade slots, along with Master of the Force 1, something that is dearly missed on the Commander Luke, a unit which, in my opinion, is a flat downgrade from Operative Luke, though you can make use of the command cards for both heroes, which means that if Operative Luke is in your list, he is likely going to be a good chunk of your command hand. And really, the only major drawback to Luke Skywalker in operative form is the fact that he is not a commander, and he is very expensive, meaning you're going to have to pay an extra tax and take another commander alongside him. But once again, the Aa5 kit is here to retrofit and save the Rebel faction, as you can equip Shriv Surgov in any of your vehicles, and at just 10 points, that's going to give you the Field Commander keyword, which will give you a workaround for having to run a commander alongside Operative Luke. But after Operative Luke, we were introduced to yet another Rebel hero, and that is going to be Cassian Andor, who capped off the Rogue One phase, and he will be sneaking his way into the B tier, though for a while I did have him listed down alongside Jyn Erso in the C tier, as Cassian Andor is another infiltrating commander who boasts the stats that we are used to seeing on a lot of Rebel heroes, as he's not a very durable unit and relies on those tricky little keywords to boost his durability. After that, we're going to see that Cassian makes use of that configuration gimmick that FFG really seemed to be obsessed with during that Rogue One expansion wave, which is going to give him that pre-nerf sniper profile with infinite range, which right off the bat is going to make him a little bit more offensive than Jyn Erso, as Cassian puts a lot more of his chips into his ranged attacks while Jyn goes for the melee. But with the tactical and marksman keyword on Cassian, I really think he does come out on top, as that gives him an actual dedicated battlefield role. Still, spending 100 points on Cassian is pretty expensive for just one sniper, and if you look back at those pre-nerf sniper scout teams, they weren't popular simply because they had the best offensive profile, but rather because they were a very affordable unit, which helped justify their low-quantity, high-quality dice rolls. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for Cassian, and I really do wonder if it's worth the 100 points just to get a single sniper unit, even with the various perks that Cassian does have. Now, all that being said, Cassian does have his own set of command cards, and they are actually pretty decent, definitely more so than Jyn Erso's, as they tend to be a lot less reactionary, and actually have some pretty strong capabilities if you build your list to synergize with them. Plus a 1-pip card that actually does really buff up his lethality for a turn, which is super useful on characters like Cassian Andor, who have very low quantity but high quality dice rolls, as the more times you can get this guy to attack, the more likely he's going to justify his presence on the battlefield. So overall, Cassian is a pretty decent commander, but I think you will need to be very cunning in how you use him, and really work him on overdrive, otherwise he's not really going to make his points worth back in your list. However, the Cassian upgrade expansion did also come with everyone's favorite sass-talking, ass-kicking robots, and that is going to be K2SO. And I like to think that the reason behind K2SO's creation is somebody sitting behind the writing desk and thinking, what if C3po started hitting the gym and stopped taking everyone's crap? I am now no longer telling you the odds, I am the odds. And despite being a detachment and operative units, two traits I find somewhat undesirable, K2SO is actually a pretty good hero who is going to be coming in at the B tier, right alongside Cassian Andor. And K2SO is going to be a unit that has a pretty interesting bundle of capabilities, wrapped up into a relatively affordable 70 point cost. With Surge to Crit and 4 red melee dice combined with the Incognito keyword, he is going to be a pretty potent melee unit, who your opponents are not going to be able to focus fire down until he gets right up in their face. Combine that with his 5 red defense dice wounds and armor 1, and K2 can be a very effective tarp-hitting unit, one who has a high chance of whittling away and actually destroying his targets over time. And again, at just 70 points, that is a viable strategy. You can throw him into a high points cost squad, such as Death Troopers, and he'll tie them up and beat the crap out of them over the span of a few turns. And that makes K2SO a wrench that you can just throw right into the mechanics that is your opponent's list, and tie up units that would be much more useful elsewhere. However, K2SO can also equip Jyn's suppressive pistol, which is pretty nice with Surge to Crits, though I do think this is the inferior way to play him, but could work better if you want to play him as more of a support character, something that K2SO is capable of with his Calculate Odds keyword, and also with his singular unique command card, which has potential to be extremely useful. And all that considered, I think K2SO is actually a little bit better than Cassian himself. And while I would want to rank him a little bit higher here, he does have to be taken alongside Cassian, which is a bit of an anchor in its own right. But for the time being, that is going to cap off the Rogue One expansions. I'm really hoping we get to see things like Two Tubes and Saul. And we are going to bounce over to the Rebels side of things and take a look at the Mandalorian Resistance. Now, much like Inferno Squad, this unit has 2 different ways to be run, but we are going to start off looking at the generic Mandalorians, and this Special Forces unit is going to come in at the B tier. They are an extremely durable unit with that red armor save and the defensive surge on top of impervious and nimble, along with a fast movement speed of 3, and can be upgraded with the Beskad Duelist that gives them the Duelist keyword, turning them into a pretty effective melee unit. However, this unit is incredibly expensive, and losing a single model is really going to sting you, making keywords like Pierce all the more valuable to your opponent. On top of that, if you run a unit like this alongside a bunch of Rebel troopers, it is going to be very obvious to your opponent which unit they should target first, which makes the Mandalorian Resistance a unit that just doesn't really synergize too well with the rest of your Rebel list, and you really need to be running them alongside other units that are high priority threats, lest they be gunned down on sight. However, you also have the option to run the Clan Ren variant of the Mandalorian Resistance, who, again, much like Inferno Squad, is going to be required to equip those name character heavy weapon upgrades, who in this case is going to be Tristan and Ursa Wren, who come together to form a unit that just barely reaches that A tier ranking, with their main appeal being that they beat out the standard Mandalorian Resistance in terms of wounds, and will have a more impressive offensive dice pool when it comes to ranged attacks. Now, unlike Inferno Squad, both Ursa and Tristan synergize pretty well together, and the fact that they also have the retinue keyword with Sabine Wren is really going to boost them up and help bring those special keywords into play more often to make the best use of Tristan and Ursa. Now, all that being said, they are still a very expensive unit, one that is going to require you to constantly feed them aim tokens to make the best use of those keywords, and again, will be a high priority target, especially when targeted by other heroes. But that is going to wrap up our friendly Mandalorians and move us along to some of our more recent Rebel releases. And here we are going to have the long anticipated Lando Calrissian, one who, in my opinion, was very underwhelming and is going to be coming in at the C tier. Now, the primary thing about Lando Calrissian is that he is one of the first units to introduce the new contingency keyword, which at the time of this recording is still a very new keyword to the game that allows different command card plays. And for the time being, the benefits of this gimmick seem to be somewhat minimal, as it is a bit finicky to pull off properly, and that makes Lando feel a bit like a character who you are paying 100+ points just for that gimmicky keyword. because Lando himself in a lot of ways kind of mirrors Cassian Andor. He has the ability to infiltrate with that covert ops keyword, and he very much falls into that camp of high quality, low quantity dice, which is less appealing when you consider that it's only range 3 on him, not the full infinite range of a sniper rifle, which means Lando's overall damage output is going to be relatively low capped throughout the course of a game, which really is less than ideal. On top of that, Lando does also have a flaw card, one that is going to be inevitable, triggering off of 3 command cards in your graveyard. After that, we do have Lando's standard command cards, which are overall pretty decent and thematic, but much like Cassian's 1-pip, they're working overtime to justify that very low volume of dice, which is perhaps the most damning part about Lando Calrissian. Again, he just feels like a giant tax to get that contingency keyword. But let me know in the comments down below if you think I'm wrong about that. I have literally no experience with contingencies. I've read up maybe 3 or 4 times on how they work, and I just really can't imagine too many game-breaking synergies there, as there's a lot of good command cards in Star Wars Legion, but you always have to pay for the commander in order to get them. But fill me in if there's something I'm missing out on here. But after Lando Calrissian, we have our most recent release, which is going to be the Aa5 Speeder Truck, which is the 3rd heavy release for the Rebel Alliance, and one that I've mentioned throughout this video, as it introduced a whole new slew of crew and pilot upgrades that really retrofit a lot of the previously existing Rebel vehicles and brought them back into relevance. And of course, the Aa5 is going to be getting a rank of A. It's a full closed transport unit that is very affordable and has a ton of support upgrade options and different ways it can be fielded, and can be tweaked between offensive, defensive, and support capabilities. Overall, a very well-rounded unit for its points, one that can be extremely flexible in how you field it on the battlefield. But lastly, after the Aa5, we do have the most recent announcement for Star Wars Legion, and that is going to be the new Wookiee Warriors upgrade pack, a dual faction expansion that is going to exist for the Republic and Rebels, which is not only going to bring the traditional Wookiee Warriors over to the Republic, but also give a new unit to the Rebels, who are going to be the Kashyyyk Resistance, who are going to be coming in at the B tier, albeit a much lower B tier than the traditional Wookiee Warriors, swapping out some of their keywords and dice for a more range-oriented profile. However, while their ranged weapons are increased from range 2 to 3, they are also dropping down to just 2 white dice, which on top of the white armor saves and high wound count is going to make this unit a high quantity, low quality dice unit, something that I'm not too sure if the Rebel faction actually needs. But the main appeal of this unit is the fact that you're going to be able to make use of that older Wookiee crossbow heavy weapon upgrade, which will be giving you a little bit better dice and the Pierce keyword, which means that this squad now does exactly what those fleet troopers with that scattergun would do, but now at range 3. Definitely something not to scoff at with that high volume of dice and the Pierce keyword, but still not exactly the most impressive Special Forces build. But now that we have covered up 29 units in about 38 minutes, we have finally caught up to date with the Rebel faction and how I think about all the units in this army. But again, this is the faction that I have the least experience with, so if any of you guys think my opinions are wildly incorrect, let me know in the comments down below. Just know that I am going to be a little bit more interested in what you have to say if it's based off actual experience, especially if you are a Rebel player, as I think this faction is currently the biggest underdog, which is perhaps thematic, but a little bit damning for the people who play it, especially when we see things like the Wookiee Chieftain come out in a box set, only to be covered in red tape for Rebel players. But this video is going to cap off the faction tier reviews for the time being. Again, it's something that is going to be a living document that will be updated as new units and adjustments are made to the faction. And if you want to see that, go ahead, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and until next time guys, take care.